The sun hung low over the Atacama Desert, baking the cracked earth into something that looked more like another planet than Earth. Dust swirled in lazy spirals, and the silence was so thick it felt like you could touch it. Out here, miles from the nearest town, the only sounds were the crunch of boots on dry soil and the occasional sigh of wind through ancient rock formations. A lone figure moved slowly across the barren landscape, carrying a small backpack and a handheld spectrometer. She wasn't looking for aliens, just data. Atmospheric readings, mineral samples, maybe a few rare microbes that clung to life in this extreme place. She'd done this kind of field work for years. Quiet, methodical, safe, or so she thought. Then she saw it, a dark smudge in the distance near the edge of a shallow crater. At first, she figured it was debris from a recent meteor shower. The Atacama got hit more often than most places because of its clear skies and dry air. But as she got closer, something felt off. The shape wasn't jagged like rock, it was curved, smooth, almost organic. Her heart started to beat faster. She slowed her steps, scanning the area with her eyes, not her instruments. That's when she saw the hand. Not a human hand, not exactly. The fingers were longer. The skin a pale gray with faint silver undertones like moonlight on wet stone. It was half buried in the dust, unmoving, and next to it, curled against its side, was a small child. A real child. Human. Barefoot, wearing torn pajamas, eyes closed, breathing shallowly. She froze. Her training told her to back away, call for help, wait for authorities. This was way beyond her pay grade. But the child looked so small, so fragile in that endless emptiness. And the other figure, whatever it was bleeding. A dark, almost iridescent fluid seeped from a wound on its side, mixing with the red dust. She didn't think. She just moved. Dropping her pack, she knelt beside them. The air smelled strange, metallic like ozone after a storm. She checked the child first. Warm skin, steady pulse, dehydrated but alive. Then she turned to the other being. Up close it looked exhausted, not threatening. Its chest rose and fell in weak, uneven breaths. One eye fluttered open, deep black like polished obsidian, and locked onto hers. There was fear in it, yes, but also something else, recognition. Like it knew she wasn't going to hurt them. She pulled out her water bottle, half full, and gently lifted the child's head. A few drops on the lips. The tiny mouth moved instinctively. Then, hesitating only a second, she offered some to the stranger. It didn't drink, but its hand twitched toward the bottle as if in thanks. Her radio crackled to life. Base to field unit, status check? She almost didn't answer, but she knew she had to. I found something, she said, voice shaking slightly. 2 individuals. One's a child. The other, I don't know what it is. Both injured. Request immediate medical and security support. She didn't mention the word alien. She didn't have to. The silence on the other end said everything. While she waited, she used her emergency blanket to shield them from the sun. She talked softly, not to calm them, but to calm herself. "You're going to be okay," she whispered, more to herself than to them. Help is coming, but help when it arrived came fast and loud. Within an hour, helicopters thumped in the distance. Military vehicles kicked up dust clouds on the horizon. Men in tactical gear surrounded the crater before the medics even got close. Cameras flashed. Orders were barked. The child was whisked away in a thermal wrap. The other figure was placed on a stretcher, wrists gently but firmly secured with non-metallic restraints. Through it all, the stranger never took its eyes off her. Not with anger, not with fear, with something like sorrow. Back at the research outpost, she was debriefed for hours. They asked the same questions over and over. What did it say? Did it speak? Did it threaten you? What did it look like up close? She answered as best she could, but her mind kept drifting back to that moment in the dust, when it was just her, a lost child, and someone who'd clearly traveled a very long way to protect them. She didn't sleep that night. Instead, she watched the live feed from the crater on her tablet. News channels had picked up the story. Grainy footage of her kneeling beside the 2 figures played on loop. Headlines exploded. Mystery beings found in Chilean desert. Human child recovered, but who saved her? Is this first contact? By morning, her face was everywhere. Strangers called her a hero. Others called her reckless. Conspiracy theorists claimed it was a government hoax. Scientists demanded access. Religious groups declared it a sign of the end times. And governments, so many governments, started talking in hushed, urgent tones behind closed doors. She didn't feel like a hero. She felt like someone who'd tripped over a door that was never meant to be opened. All she'd done was offer water. But in that simple act, she'd changed everything. What she didn't know yet was that the being she'd helped wasn't just lost. It was running. And the things it was running from? They were already on their way. The world held its breath, waiting to see what came next. But in a quiet room in Geneva, under armed guard and bright lights, the stranger asked only one thing through a translator drone. "Is the child safe?" When told yes, it closed its eyes and whispered something in a language no human had ever heard. The translator struggled, glitched, then finally offered a rough approximation. Then my journey was not in vain. Outside, the sun rose on a planet that no longer felt quite so alone, and a lot less safe. And it all started with one person, one choice, and a single bottle of water in the middle of nowhere. Weeks passed, and the world couldn't stop talking about what happened in the desert. But inside a high-security medical facility tucked away in the Swiss countryside, things were quiet. Too quiet. The being who'd been found with the child was recovering, but not in the way anyone expected. It didn't eat human food. It didn't sleep on a bed. Instead, it sat for hours near a window, watching clouds drift across the sky like it had never seen them before. Doctors and scientists watched from behind one-way glass, taking notes, running tests, trying to understand. But understanding wasn't coming easy. The being's biology was unlike anything on Earth. Its cells repaired themselves at an astonishing rate. Its blood carried oxygen in a way that defied known chemistry, and its eyes adjusted to light so quickly it was almost unsettling. Yet despite all that strangeness, there was something deeply familiar in the way it moved. Gentle, careful, like it was afraid of breaking something. The real breakthrough didn't come from machines or labs. It came from the child. She'd been taken to a separate wing at first, checked for injuries, scanned for unknown pathogens, questioned by psychologists who spoke in soft voices and used stuffed animals to make her feel safe. But she barely spoke. She clung to a small, smooth stone she'd been found holding and flinched at loud noises. Then one afternoon, she pointed to a drawing on the wall, a simple sketch of stars, and said a single word that wasn't English, wasn't any known language on Earth. That word reached the being's ears through the building's intercom system. And for the first time since arriving, it reacted strongly. It stood up, pressed its hands against the glass wall of its room, and made a soft, melodic sound in return. That's when they realized. The child and the being understood each other. From then on, the rules changed. They were allowed to be together, under supervision, of course. At first, they just sat side by side, the child tracing shapes in the air while the being watched with quiet intensity. Slowly, they began to communicate, not with full sentences, but with gestures, drawings, hums, and shared looks that carried more meaning than words ever could. A team brought in a new kind of AI, a learning system designed to pick up patterns in unknown languages. It started simple. The being would point to water, say a word, and the child would repeat it. The AI recorded it, compared it to other sounds, and slowly built a dictionary. Over days, a story began to form. The child hadn't been kidnapped by monsters. She'd been taken by something far more organized, something that saw humans not as people but as raw material. According to what the being shared, certain off-world groups had been quietly observing Earth for centuries. Most followed a strict rule, don't interfere. But a splinter faction had broken away. They believed human DNA held unique adaptability, useful for surviving in unstable environments across the galaxy. So they started taking children. Not to hurt them, not at first, but to study them, alter them, and eventually use them as living tools. The being, whose name, when finally understood, sounded like a breeze through tall grass, had been part of a quiet resistance. Not soldiers, but watchers, protectors. They'd tracked the rogue group for months, following faint energy trails across star systems. When they learned a child had been taken from a remote village in Mongolia, they pursued them all the way to Earth. But their ship was damaged during entry, crashing in the desert. The being barely escaped with the child before the others could reclaim her. Now, as this story unfolded in hushed meetings and encrypted briefings, governments were torn. Some saw the being as proof that humanity wasn't alone, and that someone out there had actually tried to help. Others saw a threat wrapped in kindness. How do we know this isn't a trick? One official asked during a closed-door session. What if they're testing us? Softening us up before the real invasion? The tension grew when deep space radar stations picked up something unusual. Far beyond Mars, a single object was slowing down as it entered the solar system. Its trajectory pointed straight toward Earth. No signal, no identification. Just silent, steady approach. Panic rippled through defense networks. Emergency protocols were activated. Fighter jets were put on standby. The UN Security Council met in the middle of the night. Back in the facility, the being seemed to sense the shift. It stopped drawing. It stopped humming. It just held the child's hand and stared at the ceiling, as if listening to something no one else could hear. When asked what it knew about the approaching object, it drew a simple picture. Two ships. One small broken, the one that had crashed. The other larger, sleek with a symbol that looked like an open eye. Beneath it, it wrote a word the AI translated as seekers. Not enemies, it tried to explain through the system. They come to recover, to understand. But fear doesn't listen to nuance. Within 48 hours, a coalition of nations, led by those who believed Earth had to act first, authorized the use of newly deployed orbital defense platforms. These weren't science fiction weapons. They were real, built over the last decade in secret, meant for asteroid deflection but easily repurposed. The order was given. Intercept and disable the incoming vessel before it reached lunar orbit. The being begged them not to. It showed them star maps, timelines, messages it had tried to send before the crash. They only want the child back, it insisted. They don't know she's safe. They think she's still with the others. But the decision had already been made. The strike happened at dawn. From Earth, it looked like a brief flash near the moon, bright then gone. Mission Control declared success. The object was destroyed. In the facility, the being collapsed to its knees. It didn't scream. It didn't cry out. But a low, mournful sound came from deep in its chest, a sound that made the guard step back uneasy. The child ran to it, wrapping her small arms around its neck, whispering the same words she'd said weeks ago in the hospital. Later, through broken translations and tear-filled eyes, the being managed to say what no one wanted to hear. They weren't soldiers. They were healers, scientists. They came to bring her home and to warn us. Because now, with that ship gone, no one would know the truth. And worse, its destruction had sent a signal across the stars. A signal that said, Earth is dangerous. Earth attacks without warning. The child clung tighter. Outside, the world celebrated a victory. But inside that quiet room, two survivors knew the real war hadn't even begun yet. And it all started because someone tried to do the right thing, and no one knew how to trust it. The celebration didn't last long. At first, news channels played the orbital strike on loop. Clean, distant, almost like a video game. Experts praised the precision and strategic foresight. Politicians gave speeches about protecting Earth's sovereignty. People on the street felt a strange mix of pride and unease, like they'd won a fight they didn't fully understand. But then the debris started falling. Not all of it burned up in the atmosphere. Fragments of the destroyed ship, some no bigger than a shoebox, others the size of cars, rained down over Southeast Asia. Most landed in the ocean. But one large piece slammed into the outskirts of Jakarta during morning rush hour. The explosion wasn't nuclear. It wasn't even chemical, not in any way scientists recognized. It was something else, energy-based, unstable. The blast flattened 3 city blocks. Fire spread fast. Hundreds were hurt. Dozens didn't make it. Suddenly, the clean victory didn't feel so clean. Protests erupted overnight. In Jakarta, people held candles and photos of the lost. In Geneva, crowds gathered outside the UN building, holding signs that read, "We shot first," and "Who gave us the right?" Online, the mood shifted hard. Memes turned dark. Debates turned personal. Friends argued in group chats. Families stopped speaking at dinner tables. And in the middle of it all, the being who'd tried to stop the strike sat in silence, watching the news on a small screen. It didn't need translation to understand grief. It had seen it before on other worlds and other times. But this time it felt responsible. Not because it caused the crash, but because it hadn't been able to make anyone listen. The child stayed close, her small hand always finding its way into the being's. She didn't understand politics or war, but she knew sadness when she saw it. Sometimes she'd hum the same soft tune the being used to sing in the desert. It was the only thing that seemed to bring a little calm back into the room. Meanwhile, government scrambled to control the narrative. The coalition that ordered the strike doubled down. We acted on verified intelligence. The ship posed an imminent threat, but leaked internal reports told a different story. Analysts had warned the vessel showed no weapon signatures, no hostile maneuvers. It had simply been approaching slowly, like someone knocking on a door. Then came the broadcast. 3 days after the strike, every major satellite network, TV, radio, internet, was briefly interrupted. Not hacked, not jammed, overridden. A single image filled every screen, a star map centered on Earth with dozens of lines connecting it to distant points in the galaxy. Then a voice, not human, not machine, spoke in hundreds of languages at once, perfectly synced to each viewer's native tongue. "We watched you for 12,000 of your years," it said, calm and sorrowful. "We protected your world from those who would harvest your kind. We honored your right to grow on your own, but you have now broken the oldest law among us. Do not strike the unknown in fear." The message lasted less than a minute. Then everything went back to normal, as if nothing had happened. But everything had changed. Scientists confirmed the signal couldn't have come from any human-made source. Its origin was deep space, but it arrived instantly. No delay, no lag. That alone defied physics as we knew it. More chillingly, the star map matched data from old astronomical records. Records that showed Earth had been subtly shielded from cosmic radiation and asteroid impacts far more often than chance could explain. We hadn't been alone. We'd been guarded, and now by firing first, we'd not only killed peaceful visitors, we'd torn down the invisible fence that kept worse things away. Panic didn't explode all at once. It seeped in like water through cracks. Stock markets dipped. Air travel slowed. People started hoarding food, not because they thought the world would end tomorrow, but because they no longer trusted that someone was watching over them. In the facility, the being was finally allowed to speak directly to world leaders via secure video link with the AI translator running in real time. It didn't ask for apologies. It didn't demand justice. It simply explained. The group that took the child was a rogue faction banned by the larger community of watchers. The ship that was destroyed belonged to the ones trying to stop them. Now with their messengers gone, that rogue group would see Earth as vulnerable, and they wouldn't come to talk. "They will come to take," the being said. "Not just children, everything." The room fell silent. Even the most skeptical officials looked shaken. Back in the desert research station, now under military lockdown, the person who first found the child and the being watched all of this unfold on a grainy laptop. She hadn't been allowed near the facility since that first day. Officially, she was on administrative leave. Unofficially, she was being kept quiet. But she couldn't stay silent forever. She recorded a short video on her phone. No script, no makeup, just her, sitting on a folding chair in an empty lab. "I didn't save a hero," she said, voice steady but tired. "I helped someone who was already trying to save us. And instead of listening, we shot the messenger. Now we're alone in a universe that's suddenly very loud." She posted it online with no fanfare. Within hours, it had millions of views. People didn't just watch it. They shared it with messages like, "This is what courage looks like," and "Why didn't we believe her sooner?" Governments tried to discredit her. Some called her naive. Others said she'd been manipulated. But the truth had a weight that couldn't be ignored, because the real enemy wasn't out there in space. It was here inside us. Our fear, our rush to judgment, our belief that violence is the only language the universe understands. And now, that belief had cost us more than lives. It had cost us trust, safety, time. As night fell over the planet, people looked up at the stars, not with wonder, but with worry. For the first time in human history, the sky didn't feel like a promise. It felt like a warning. And somewhere in a quiet room with a child holding its hand, the being who tried to help us whispered one last thing into the translator. "You didn't start a war. You ended a peace you never knew you had." The world didn't collapse overnight, but it started to crack. After the broadcast from the stars and the truth about Earth's silent guardians came out, governments tried to hold things together. Emergency summits were called. New alliances formed almost daily. A global defense group was announced, the Terran Accord, with the goal of uniting every nation under one strategy. On paper, it sounded strong. In practice, it was messy. Old rivalries flared. Secret deals were made behind closed doors. Some countries shared intel. Others hoarded it like gold. Trust, already thin, began to vanish completely. Meanwhile, life on the ground changed in quiet, unsettling ways. Power grids flickered without warning. Not from attacks, but from strange interference no engineer could explain. Satellites went dark one by one. Not from missiles, but from something that seemed to gently nudge them out of orbit. Weather patterns shifted. Crops failed in places they'd never failed before. Scientists whispered about cosmic pressure, as if the universe itself was testing Earth's readiness, or punishing its recklessness. And then the disappearances started again. Not big ones. Not cities vanishing. Just single people, mostly children, gone from their beds, their playgrounds, their schoolyards. No signs of struggle. No footprints. Just empty spaces where someone used to be. Each time a faint shimmer was reported in the air afterward, like heat rising off pavement. Authorities denied a pattern, but parents knew better. They started keeping their kids inside after dark. Neighborhoods organized night watches. Fear became a daily routine. Inside the secure facility, the being watched all of this with growing sorrow. It tried to help, offering data, star charts, warnings about the rogue group's methods. But every time it spoke, its words were filtered through layers of bureaucracy, suspicion, and translation errors. What it meant as a warning came out as a threat. What it offered as peace was seen as weakness. The child, now stronger and more alert, became its only true bridge to humanity. She'd learned to speak in short sentences again, mixing Earth words with sounds from the stars. She'd draw pictures of tall, shadowy figures with too many eyes and point to the sky. Doctors realized she wasn't making it up. She was remembering. One night, during a rare moment alone, the being pressed its forehead gently to the child's and made a soft, chiming sound. The AI translator, usually slow, picked it up instantly. They're coming closer. They think Earth is weak now. They think no one will protect you. The next morning, the child refused to leave the being's side. She clung to its arm like she knew something no one else did. Outside, the world prepared for war, but not the kind anyone expected. There were no armies marching, no fleets gathering in orbit. The enemy didn't want to conquer. They wanted to collect, and they were patient. Still, humanity built weapons, not just missiles and lasers, but new kinds of tech, reverse-engineered from the debris of the destroyed ship. Some of it worked. Most of it didn't. One test in the Pacific caused a temporary blackout across 3 continents. Another accidentally scrambled every digital clock in Europe for a week. Progress was slow, dangerous, and full of mistakes. Through it all, the person who'd first found them in the desert kept speaking out. Not on big stages, just online, in interviews, in town halls. She didn't shout. She didn't blame. She just reminded people we had a choice. We could have asked questions. We could have waited. Instead, we chose fear, and now we're paying for it. Her words reached more ears than ever, not because she was famous, but because people were tired of being afraid without understanding why. Then, something unexpected happened. A second broadcast came not from the watchers, but from a different source. This one showed images, Earth from space over centuries, forests growing, cities rising, wars starting and ending, children laughing in fields. The message was simple: you are not ready for us, but you are worth saving. Do not let fear erase your kindness. No one knew who sent it. But for the first time in months, hope flickered. The being, hearing the message, stood up straighter. It turned to the child and said something that made her smile. A real, bright smile, the kind that hadn't been seen since before the desert. Later, through the translator, it told the human officials, not all who watch are enemies. Some still believe in you, but belief wasn't enough to stop what was coming. Scouts from the rogue faction were already near the edge of the solar system. Smaller ships this time, stealthier. They weren't here to talk. They were here to test Earth's defenses and find more children. The Terran Accord scrambled what little they had. Fighter drones were launched. Early warning systems were activated. But everyone knew it was like bringing a flashlight to a forest fire. In the quiet hours before the first real contact, the being sat with the child by the window. Outside, the stars looked different, closer, sharper, almost watching back. The child whispered, "Will they take me again?" The being placed a hand over hers. "Not while I breathe." And in that moment, it wasn't an alien speaking. It was a guardian, a friend. Someone who'd crossed light years not for conquest, but for care. Down below in cities and villages, people locked their doors, hugged their kids tighter, and stared at the sky, not with weapons raised, but with hearts heavy with regret and resolve. Because the war hadn't started with a bang. It started with a choice. And now humanity had to live with what that choice had unleashed. But maybe, just maybe, it wasn't too late to choose differently. A year had passed since that day in the desert, and the world felt like a different place. Not because cities had fallen or skies had burned, but because something quieter, deeper had changed. People didn't trust the news the way they used to. They didn't look up at the stars with wonder anymore. They looked with caution, with questions, with a kind of tired hope that refused to die, even when everything seemed lost. Earth wasn't under siege by giant warships or laser beams. The real war was slower, sneakier. Supply chains broke down as strange interference disrupted global communications. Crops failed in regions that had never known famine. Strange energy readings popped up in remote areas, always gone by the time teams arrived. And the disappearances, they never stopped. Just slowed, like someone was watching, waiting, testing how far they could push before Earth fought back. But Earth was fighting, just not the way anyone expected. Not with bombs, but with stubborn kindness. Neighborhoods shared food. Strangers checked on each other. Schools taught kids not just math and science, but how to listen, how to question, how to choose patience over panic. It wasn't perfect. Fear still spread. Lies still traveled fast. But something had shifted in the human spirit, like a seed planted in dry soil, finally getting a drop of rain. In a quiet corner of Patagonia, where the wind howled across endless plains and the mountains stood like ancient sentinels, a small group gathered near a landing pad made of packed earth and steel plates. No crowds, no cameras. Just a few scientists, a handful of military observers, and one person who'd started it all, the one who'd knelt in the dust and offered water when no one else would. They were there to say goodbye. The being stood tall, wrapped in a simple gray cloak woven from materials not of this world. Beside it, holding its hand tightly, was the child. She wasn't the scared, silent girl from the desert anymore. She spoke in full sentences now, sometimes in English, sometimes in sounds that shimmered like wind chimes. She'd learned to read star maps. She could hum songs that made plants grow faster in test chambers. She wasn't just human anymore. She was something new, a bridge between worlds. They weren't leaving because they wanted to. They were leaving because they had to. The Watchers, the peaceful ones who'd guarded Earth for millennia, had finally responded to the being's messages. Not with anger, but with sorrow, and an offer. If the being and the child returned with them, they would try to negotiate. Not for surrender, but for understanding. They would explain what really happened. The fear, the mistake, the regret. And maybe, just maybe, they could convince the wider galactic community that Earth wasn't a threat, that it was still worth protecting. It was a fragile hope. But it was all they had. As the shuttle hummed to life, a sleek, silent craft that looked like polished stone more than metal, the being turned to the person who'd saved them both. No words were needed. They just looked at each other, two beings from different worlds, bound by one impossible moment of compassion. Then the being spoke softly, through a small translator device it now carried like a keepsake. "You showed us that humans still choose kindness, even when it's dangerous. That is rare. That is precious." The child stepped forward and placed a small object in the person's hand, a smooth stone just like the one she'd clutched in the desert, but now glowing faintly with a soft blue light. "For when you feel alone," she said simply. Tears welled up, but no one wiped them away. This wasn't a moment for hiding feelings. It was a moment for truth. The shuttle lifted off without a roar, just a quiet sigh like the Earth itself was breathing out. It rose slowly, then vanished into the clouds, leaving no trail, no smoke, just empty sky. Back in cities and villages across the planet, people felt it. Not physically, but in their bones. Something had left. Something important. Life didn't magically get better after that. The rogue faction still lurked at the edges of the solar system. Government still argued. Fear still whispered in dark corners. But something had changed in the way people faced it. They started listening more, jumping to conclusions less. They remembered the lesson written in dust and starlight, that one small act of care can ripple farther than any weapon. In hidden labs, scientists worked not just on defenses, but on ways to send peaceful signals into space. Music, poetry, images of children planting trees. In classrooms, teachers told the story of the desert rescue, not as science fiction, but as a warning and a promise. And in homes, parents held their kids a little tighter, not out of fear, but out of love that refused to be silenced. The war wasn't over, maybe it never would be, but humanity had learned something vital, that survival isn't just about strength. It's about who you choose to be when no one's watching. And in a quiet journal, kept in a drawer in a small house near the Andes, the last entry read, "We thought saving a life would make us heroes. Instead, it made us visible, and in the dark, visibility is the most dangerous thing of all, but maybe it's also the bravest." Far above, in the silent ocean of stars, a tiny blue dot continued to spin, fragile, flawed, and still full of light. Not because it was perfect, but because even after everything, it hadn't stopped trying to be kind.